Hello to everybody logging on for the ECCP Lunch and Learn webinar. We will get started in a few minutes. Just wanted to pop in and say hello, and I'm wondering for Maureen, my co-host, if you're able to unmute yourself and we can test audio and make sure we can hear you. Might still be getting connected to audio. Hello to those logging on. I see a bunch of people are starting to jump on. We will get started in just a few minutes. Everybody just making sure, a couple housekeeping, everybody's muted by default. And then Maureen, if you're connected to audio at this point, if you want to unmute and chime in so we can make sure we hear you, that would be awesome. And everybody else, we will get started in just a few minutes.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Maureen. Yay, we hear you loud and clear.
Awesome.
Sweet. So we'll give people, let's see, we'll give people 5 more minutes to log on, and then we'll get started. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to everybody who's logging on for the ECCP Lunch and Learn. Just chiming in to say we'll start just a couple minutes after noon. So settle in and we'll get started in just a few minutes. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Officially afternoon at this point. We will go ahead and slowly get started as people continue logging on for the ECCP Lunch and Learn. So thanks to everybody who is joining. You are hopefully in the right place. This is the first actually Early Childhood Colorado Partnership Lunch and Learn of 2019, focused on using visuals in your communication. So I'm Hannah Nichols. I'm with the Civic Canopy. We support the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership with network stewardship and coordination. And I come to the table with a good deal of expertise around communication, especially connected to framing and research base behind communication. My co-host today is Maureen Maycheko, who's the Director of Communications at Reach Out and Read Colorado. So I'll let you jump in and introduce yourself too, Maureen, and share a little bit about your experience in communications as well.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm so excited to be part of this call. I see some familiar names on the participant list, and for those of you who have not met me, feel free to reach out afterwards. For those of you who I know, let's reconnect soon. So I am the Communications Director at Reach Out Read Colorado. I've been here for about 4 years, and a lot of my specialty is in marketing strategy and driving marketing initiatives. I pride myself on saying that I always show up for my audiences, and you know, I'm really excited to be on this call and to walk through some visuals and communications today.
Awesome, thank you. So some housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded today, so we'll be able to send things out to you all afterward. And I hear somebody is having issues hearing. Hopefully most people are not having issues with audio. Things are unmuted, that kind of thing. Making sure that people are putting volume up on their computers and that kind of thing. Let me just quickly send out a message to everyone. And I can't type and talk at the same time, so just a moment. Okay, so it sounds like most people are able to hear us. Awesome. Okay, so we'll move forward and hope that people can fix the audio issues on there and moving things up and volumes up and that kind of thing. So back to some of the housekeeping things we're recording. The default is that all the participants are muted as you log on, but should you have any questions along the way, and when we create space and time for questions, you are 100% welcome to unmute yourself. and chime in. You are also more than welcome to use the chat function. People are already using that, and I'm going to ask everybody to chime in on the chat box in just a moment. With so many people logged on, and typically with lunch and learns like these, we just don't have time to go around and do introductions, but it would be wonderful if everybody would be willing to go in, especially because I see lots of different kinds of faces that we don't typically have on a lunch and learn as participants. So chime in the chat box and share your name, your organization, and just say hi to everybody. That would be awesome, so people can see who is on the lunch and learn today. And is that my last? I think that's my last kind of piece of just general housekeeping. So we have 90 minutes today, and we may end early, but with a demo of Canva and everything, we wanted to make sure to provide ample time for us all to connect and for people to ask questions as we go. So know that we're here until 1:30, and you're totally welcome to stay for that whole time, I hope, and otherwise we will make sure to have this recorded. So in terms of what we hope that you take away today and what we're really focusing on today is, just as we know, our messages are interpreted in various ways based on our strategy, the frames we use for those of us who are much more familiar with the framing work and have been part of trainings connected to the Shared Message Bank and the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership. So the visuals that we use in our communication are very much the same. When we talk about visuals, we're really referring to any type of image you're using in your communications, from stock photos to videos to infographics. And so today's webinar is really meant for anyone who is incorporating visual media into their work, which frankly applies to most of us these days. And we would hope that, this is definitely not limited to those who are familiar with communications, or even those who are super tech savvy. We hope that this can be something that becomes a little more accessible and useful for those of you who may feel like you are new to this, and can help you feel a little more confident in moving forward with some of your communications related work and using visuals more strategically in your communication. And so this is really rooted in the work of the Shared Messaging Action Team and the Shared Message Bank. So if you're not familiar with the Shared Message Bank quite yet, we encourage you to log on to that. You can find it at earlychildhoodcoloradopartnership.org, and we'll make sure that we send out links and everything later. We'll send out slides and all of that good stuff afterward as well. But the Shared Message Bank and the framing research is at the root of a lot of this, and over time that action team really realized the images and the visual media we are using also plays as powerful, in some cases more powerful of a role than our messages and our words. So today we want you to leave considering the importance of audiences and desired actions connected to communication. So Maureen will really kick us off for the most part, diving into what I think she's outlining a great framework for communication in general, but especially connected to visual communications. I'll jump in with helping support you all to recognize, that was a typo there. I didn't really frame that outcome very well, I apologize. But recognizing how to choose visual media, so images, graphics, icons for your communications, which reflect research-based framing and best practices. And then we'll do a little demo designing a simple visual in tools like infographics and social media content using Canva, which is a free and really easy to use online tool. There are a few out there, but Canva is one that we know is used by a lot of folks, and is one, again, that makes it fairly easy to put together things like infographics, social media graphics, things like that. Cool, I'm loving seeing people chiming in and sharing their introductions on the chat, so keep going. And so wanted to start and kick it before I have officially handed over to Maureen for a while. Just wanted to kind of start us off with this communicating with visuals checklist. So, and this is of course a very high level checklist, but thinking about audience. So Maureen will really dive into to whom are you speaking, what are their needs, and how can you provide them with a meaningful experience, and how you think about your communications overall, but especially your visuals. Thinking about actions, what do you want them to do as a result of your communication, and how can your visuals connect with that end goal? And then framing. How can you ensure that your visuals support your vision? How can you ensure that they don't inadvertently reinforce what we call swampy narrative? So I'll make sure, for those of you who may not be familiar with our swamp that's connected to the shared message bank, I'll pull that up and show you some examples of how even our visuals and our images can reinforce some of the alligators that eat our message in the swamp. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it off to Maureen. And Maureen, if it's okay with you, maybe I'll just stick with the mouse and we can advance as we go since you don't have a ton of slides, but sometimes it tends to get a little wonky trying to pass off the ability to click.
Yes, no, please keep the mouse if you're willing to do that. Yeah, so I love seeing everybody's introductions. I think when Hannah and I first started building out the concepts for this talk today, that there was a real focus on providing some frameworks and supports for people that might not have as robust of a communications effort or even resources to support their communications work kind of across the network. So it's excellent to see a variety of people from, communications directors to people who are in program management and kind of have that diversity of voices on the call. So I think for anybody that does have a ton of experience or really any experience or a story to share, please feel free to jump on and add your voice, because it only benefits the group to hear from kind of multiple perspectives. All right, let's get started. So I think that as we talk through audience and expected actions, that for me, some of this is really grounded in context for marketing efforts. So I think kind of the overall goal is, as we're having this conversation, and something to keep in mind, is how all of these plans and steps and activities are coming together to build trust. And that's particularly important as Hannah dives more into strategically framing visuals and really looking at the use of visuals and how and why those are effective. And so in many ways, trust is the most powerful weapon that an organization has. This goes beyond just your communications activities. I think it's really important to frame what does trust mean for the organization that you're working at, and then look at that as a second level is for your communications activities, what does trust mean? And I said in the beginning of my introduction that I pride myself on showing up for my audiences. And for me, that's where trust comes in, that for the most part, an audience of ours, even the smallest segment, knows that we're really examining how we're sending messages out, what the visuals are that are included in those messages, what platform we're using to reach our audience, and all of that is coming together to provide the best possible experience for the person encoding or the person decoding the message on the other end. To take one step back too is I think that there's sometimes that questioning of, do you have trust, and then how do you build it? And I think that there's a question to say, show up for your audience. What does that mean? So for me, showing up for my audience just means that when I come to work, that I'm really thinking about what my audience needs, and I am there as a representative for all the segments. So if we're sending a communication out and somebody says, oh, let's include, we have an upcoming conference. So, we have an email newsletter going out to a segment audience, and somebody says, oh, well, we should hit that audience with, our save the date for the conference, that I really see myself in the role where I'm questioning that. Is this the best audience to get a save the date? Do they maybe need more information about the conference or less information about the conference? Are they actually people that even need to be attending the conference? That asking those kinds of questions and figuring out what's best for who is what I would consider showing up for your audiences. All right, Hannah, you can advance. That was a great question, Becky. Thank you. So the second piece for me to create some context for this conversation is making connections, which is basically, what communications is on to a certain degree. So To frame this a little bit, people share 16,000 words per day, and every hour there are more than 100 million conversations about brands happening around the globe. So, you know, it starts to be that question of how do you cut through the noise, and how do you make sure that your message or your voice as a brand, as an organization, is being heard? You know, visual storytelling is so much more relevant in these times, especially in the frame of our digital age, where so many people have access to the internet and are having, you know, digital conversations at much higher rates. And so, you know, there's a constant battle for audience attention. And so how do you really amplify your message and make sure that your audience is, one, receiving your message, and two, it's the right message for your audience to make them take action. Next slide, Hannah. So the ideas that I wanted to walk through today, just to set up this visual communications discussion, was basically about amplifying with strategy. So I think that to have this basic framework in place is really important, to be able to understand how you're choosing visuals, how you're working with them, and even farther beyond that is what those visuals mean to your audience, which is a lot of what Hannah's going to talk about in the second part of this. The emotions that are received, the thoughts that come into people's heads, all of that should be something that's taken into consideration. So basically with the strategy piece of this, you know, step one is to always set a goal, to know, you know, what you're expecting to get out of whatever effort it is, big or small. So whether it's just posting, you know, 5 social media messages that are part of a campaign, to, you know, a larger day of giving effort, like Colorado Gives Days for us here in Colorado, that understanding and really defining that goal is going to be your first step. The pieces under that are really thinking through who is your target message, who is your target audience, what is the message, what is your call to action or intended outcome, when your communications and activities will be taking place. Is it a single send or a single post? Is it something that's reoccurring? Is it happening across channels? So maybe social media and e-news, or even beyond that. And then what platforms align with your goal and audience. So platforms, there is more looking at the actual tools in place. So think, you know, email marketing, your CMS, your content management system, social media, text to give if you have text as a platform, that sort of thing. And then the last piece is measurement. So it's really setting up a way for you to measure any goals you have, whether that's recording some baselines like you know, click-through rates on your email and open rates before and after sends, that sort of thing, which is really powerful to know whether all of these things are actually aligning with your intended audience to set you up to reach your goal. So just to walk through this really fast, I think, you know, thinking about target audiences can be big and small. And when you're able to define your target audiences, you can better choose data visuals to represent and reach that audience. So, you know, Hannah and I had a big discussion about, you know, framing with visuals and, you know, what comes first. Is it defining audience? Is it defining message? Is it defining the framework for the visuals that you're reaching? And you know, I think that that's gonna really depend on who you are as a communicator, but I tend to believe that defining audience is really always the best place to start. So for us, an audience could be Denver site coordinators in the Denver metro region, which is very, very micro level, or it could be our entire email list, which is on the macro level. And defining that, knowing who we're sending a communications to, is really driving a lot of the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. what is the message is basically the story that you're telling. And so this is a lot of where the visuals are going to come in. How do visuals support that message? What are you trying to convey? What is the storytelling element of your communications activities? The call to action or intended outcome is what you want to achieve. It's an outcome of your goal that you set. So if you're looking at a goal of 300 conference registrations by April 2019, then, Denver Metro site coordinators is a great target audience. The message is details about a conference. It's how to register, when to register, who is the keynote speaker, all details that would want to drive somebody to the call to action, which is registering for the conference. The timeline piece of this is going to be really dependent on your capacity, time, and resources. For those of you who aren't full-time communications experts, this is really going to, it's going to really have to be individual to you. So, some places you can do a single send, or you're going to want to, for conference registration, send out an initial email to our target audience, let's say Denver Metro site coordinators. And then for us, a lot of the times we'll do a resend maybe 2 weeks later. But we always take out anybody who's already registered for the conference. So if your call to action is to register for the conference, you want to be really thoughtful about not asking your audience to register if they already have. That's a really, really easy way to start to kind of decrease that trust, is if you're sending messages that aren't relevant anymore. And you're really not offering them any kind of connection or anything that's meaningful at that point if they've already registered. So I think, part of this is being thoughtful. And I think, again, I'd answer that's part of showing up for your audience is taking that extra step to take people out of a funnel or to take people out of your communications plan when they've actually, taken the action that you intended them to take or that you want them to. Platforms, so in the example of conference communication, we'd be looking at social media, probably specifically Facebook. We wouldn't use a lot of our other tools because it's not relevant to our audience. Email marketing, but to specific target audiences, and the message would probably change. We'd send out probably 3 to 4 emails that all have different information depending on the audience. And last, the measurement piece, which is a little bit more complicated, but really important. And some of those examples can be, click-through rate on email, open rates, which help you understand if the audience is actually reacting positively or negatively. Looking at social media engagement, looking at time of day that the social media post was made. I think that sort of thing helps you really define whether all of these kind of strategy points are coming together. Next slide, Hannah. So in terms of visuals, it's interesting to think about this idea or this kind of term that everybody's familiar with, which is a picture worth 1,000 words. And it's especially interesting to start to try to answer that question within the context of the stat that I shared earlier, that people share 16,000 words per day, and every hour there are more than 100 million conversations about brand. So in reality, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then connecting the right visuals with your audience is going to really, drive that connection between your audience and your brand, your audience and your message. All of that is going to come together and be more amplified. So as we talk through this, I really see brand holistically as these 3 arms. So trust, connection, and storytelling. We talked about the first 2. The storytelling piece is where message comes in. I think questions to ask for this arm is, what is your message? What is the story that you're trying to tell? And what tools will you utilize? And for tools, this is really where data visualization comes in. So communications activities must involve the use of graphics and pictures to engage with your audience, to drive actions and emotions, and to spark interaction. And the interaction piece is interesting because you may think of, you know, you send an email or you send a newsletter, there's a feature image. You pick an image that's relatively aligned with the content that you're sending out, and that might be where the, you know, thought process ends. And that's okay, but you can take it a few steps deeper and think about, you know, the emotions that somebody might have looking at a picture. Is it a close-up of a person's face, or is it, you know, action shots of them, you know, doing something related to your brand? I was recently working with a nonprofit that featured a lot of really stagnant images of teenagers posed. And they were an empowerment technology-centered brand. And so, you know, the recommendation was that they feature more photos of their end users actually engaging in these activities. So on a computer, you know, in front of a group making a presentation, and to move away from kind of stagnant posed photos because it wasn't doing the best to represent who their brand was. So that really is what plays into the storytelling piece of this is, you know, what is the ultimate takeaway that you want your audience or your end user to have when they view these visuals and the messages or the words, the text on the page that connect with them. So it's interesting, and for some of you, I'm sure that, you know, having all of these steps before and after you actually, you know, accomplish the activity may be overwhelming. For some of you, I'm sure you do this and more, which is awesome. But I think that if you can, I think that when you can, you know, it's really about bringing all of these things together. It's the trust, the connection, and the storytelling part of it to reach your audiences where they are. So not expecting your audience to take too many steps, too many clicks, too many actions before they receive some sort of a benefit from the communications that you're sending out. Andrew said that he likes to use the term visual verbs when talking about photos, the idea of photos that do something. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Andrew. Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, photos that represent more than just an image, that are interactive, that make you feel something, and that you can look at and really discern what it is that you're trying to convey or what your brand stands for in one glance, and in a short glance too, because part of this is that really kind of competition for attention. All right, Hannah. We're gonna take a second to answer any questions anybody might have, or beyond questions, if anybody has anything else to add or share to this part, like Andrew's addition of visual verbs, I would love for you all to jump in right now too.
Yeah, we just want to pause for a minute or two, and especially it's not often that you get a seasoned communication professional like Maureen at the table. And so again, like I said earlier, she's presenting a lot of what she just shared is much more than just visuals. It's how you can think broadly about your communications more strategically, whether or not you are a full-time communications professional, have one housed at your organization, which is not the case for a lot of us. So I think this is a lot of helpful information to just start thinking about and helping us move in the right direction. So Polly asked the question of, is there a standard for open rate or click-through that you use as a measure? Maureen, I'll let you chime in on that one first if that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So the last I looked, a nonprofit open rate average open rate is about 22% across industry standard. You can find average or standard open rates on the internet, just with a quick search, and they'll have those narrowed down by your industry. And so they vary across the board, but definitely MailChimp or Constant Contact has those resources available. And that's a great question, Polly, because that's a great place for pulling a baseline to be able to measure your activities against.
Yeah, yeah, and I think for those of us who, knowing that we run the gamut today of those, again, who may not even be using MailChimp or Constant Contacts, those types of mail management tools quite yet, but for those who might be interested, you get to learn a lot more about the data behind who and who's opening and how often and who's clicking on what in your emails. So I, for one, am very happy to be a resource on whether you're living in spreadsheets right now or your Outlook contacts for managing your outreach and wanting to move to a more dynamic tool like that. It can be pretty low lift once you learn how to use it. I'm a huge advocate, so totally willing to be a resource, and I imagine Maureen and I'm sure there are others logged on today who are willing to be resources in that space for sure, and helping people get set up on that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I would add too that, you know, there are nuances to any metric that's provided by a platform. So there's always, you know, pop-up blockers or, you know, different kinds of tech aspects which may be impacting open rate and click-through rate. So it's not going to be a 100% solution, but it definitely is a really good place to start and to be able to figure out, have some foundational numbers for how your activities are performing.
Mm-hmm. And then Jackie asked a question of, could you discuss the use of videos on a website? And I'm wondering if it's the kind of benefit or cost and benefits of using videos on a website versus static images. And I'm even thinking beyond a website into social media too, and just how the use of video is becoming a more useful tool to reach your audiences. But do you want to chime in on that, Maureen?
Yeah, definitely. So this, again, I think is going to be dependent on capacity, but there are some amazing organizations that are utilizing video that is just captured on a cell phone, especially with the advent of video technology on just available on really any cell phone, that this is starting to be a field that's really taking off. There are a ton, I'll provide some examples. I can't type this stuff while I'm talking. It's definitely not a skill that I have, but I can provide some excellent examples and resources of places that are doing that well. I am definitely an advocate for the use of video. There are tons of statistics and metrics across the board that that can help you define a best practice plan for incorporating videos, like the length of time to expect someone to watch, themes for really creation of video content. But if you're not currently using video content, I think that's definitely something that should be on a priority list to explore. Mm-hmm. We could also, as a note, do an entire webinar on video content.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll pull some resources and we can send those to the group. But at this point, it's kind of standard industry best practice to have some sort of video content as a part of your marketing and communications efforts.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then, so Andrew chimed in and said that something we're considering at early milestones is how we can present concepts and information that are boring to a broad audience, thinking about dissemination of industry reports to parents and community groups that don't know why key data matters. Definitely something we're thinking about too. Not a question, even a comment, just something we can keep in the back of our minds and as we incorporate visuals and presentation. Definitely a great point, and I think it gets to the audience question of who are we really trying to reach with our communications, And in some of the ways that our status quo kind of ways of approaching our communications, are we just reaching the same audiences and not getting into those audiences who are typically maybe not bought in yet and don't appeal to the kinds of things that we typically share, like the reports and that kind of thing. So great comment. Any last questions for Maureen before I jump into more of the framing side and how we can think about framing connected to our visuals?
Yeah, or any other examples from the field?
All right, we'll keep going. And then we have some time at the end definitely for more questions and interaction. All right, so as we dive into the strategic framing kind of side of this, want to just go back to the basics, and those of you who have gotten a frames training or shared messaging training from me is that we dive a lot into the basics of human psychology connected to framing, and especially how human psychology connects to culture and how we interpret messages. And so in this case, it's how we really interpret images. So it's really important to understand how people interpret visuals of all kinds as we consider how we create and then what kinds of visual images that we use. So an important thing to keep in mind is that the human brain processes images much more quickly than words. This means that when we see images on a page, we're going to see that image and process it much more quickly than if we were to read a paragraph of language on the page. And so that partnered or coupled with the reality that we also, our brains react with emotions before we can reason. And so this includes the things that are tied up in that emotion and the filters in our brains of our beliefs, our values, and our biases. So every time we see an image, our beliefs and our biases and our values connected to the content in that image pop up in our brains before we can make a rational more reasoning around, what does this image telling me? What does it say? Who's included? So these are just important things to really keep in mind. And this also just helps us lean toward why having visually appealing content is so important. Why having static words on a page and helping and expecting that people read it and are captivated by it is not enough. And so when I think about even as I pop this slide up on this is the same information just presented in two different ways. I am guessing for those of you looking at the screen, your eyes were immediately drawn to the more colorful, dynamic infographic on the right side versus the basic narrative version of it on the left side. And it's not to say that some of the additional context of some of the language on the left side is not valuable and important to kind of have alongside an infographic like this. But the reality is this kind of infographic, which was created in Canva, I'll be able to demo a little bit about how to create this kind of infographic. It's much more visually appealing. It's quicker. It's easier for us to take in the numbers, especially when we're visualizing data around the information that we're taking in. We can grasp the numbers, we can grasp the data, we can grasp the story that this infographic is telling in a much quicker and timely format than, again, the information on the left side. So again, not to say that you don't necessarily need this as supportive information. And when we presented this in the 2018 highlights for the ECCP, it was a two-page kind of summary, but it was incorporated visuals throughout in addition to the narrative context that was presented. So we're going to do a little bit of an activity. So I want to focus for a moment on how framing connects to the visuals we choose. So as many of you have learned through ongoing training through the ECCP, we are highly driven by our beliefs, assumptions, and biases, as I talked to you before. And we'll kind of play this out with this activity here. So when I tell you to think about health, what do you picture first? What's the first image that comes to your mind? And you can chime in the chat box, but you can also just reflect on it for a moment of what the first image or images are when you think about health. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. And so for the average American, the public at large, the first image that pops in their head is an image like this. A doctor caring for a patient, and most likely a doctor that looks, even the doctor here, the fact that that doctor is white, is male, is also something that generally pops up first in the American mindset. And so for those of us who are advocating for things connected to health, health care, mental health, if a lot of the solutions we are focusing on are oriented outside of the doctor's office, in communities, in homes, in childcare, the fact that most Americans, when they think about health, think about an image like this, is something that we want to shift, to help people and orient people to what health really is, which is where we live, work, play, pray. Our communities are really the first line connected to our health. It is not to say that doctors don't play a very, very powerful role in our health and well-being, but the reality is that this is the default. And so if we want to reorient people's understanding to what health looks like, we want to use different types of images. And I just had to laugh because, and show you this, this is the screenshot of my Google search of doctor and patient. So not only, it just reinforces the fact that there are a couple women doctors here. There were no women or no people of color as doctors, only as patient. And I had to get to the second page to even see one person who was not white, who was the doctor, the caregiver. So this is just, again, shows the kind of default mindset of the American public. And so the pictures we use need to show a different image of what health looks like if we really want to think about our goals and our outcomes that we want to see. So wherever you work in the early childhood world, whether it's health or not, just thinking about the issue that you're working on, the outcome you want to see, and then how do you choose images that might help orient people to a new way of thinking about that issue. So I want to orient you to the swamp. Many of you might be familiar with this. So thinking about how the images we use may be inadvertently reinforcing some of the alligators in our swamp. So for those of you who may not be familiar, this is the swamp, so to speak, developed by the Frameworks Institute. It's a swamp of developmental outcomes and resilience. So Frameworks Institute does research on a myriad of social change issues. So this is the swamp connected specifically to developmental outcomes and resilience. So they'll have swamps connected to things like education, health equity, that kind of thing. But what we know, these are the things that tend to be the alligators that eat our messages, the default narratives, the frames that especially in the United States, can tend to hijack our messages. So the concepts of things like willpower, that resilience is yours if you want it. That's the classic pick yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. Resilience, that resilience is just there if we want it. It's not something we have to support or build in each other. The family bubble, which is, I would say, is one of the biggest issues we're up against in the early childhood development world, especially connected to the images that we use. How do we not reinforce that idea that the role of taking care of children is that of families, and it's not my role, it's not my problem if I'm a business leader, it's not my problem if I'm a policymaker, it's the problem of that family or that child, which is not something we want to be reinforcing. The black box osmosis piece is another big one that kids just develop. They're sponges, and the reality is kids develop in the context of relationships and environments, and the more that our images can reflect that reality, the better off we're going to be. And then another one that comes up too is the damage done is damage done idea, that and this is that fatalistic way of thinking. So when we see images, I'll show you in a moment of children that are in negative connotations, the more we promote that idea that this is too far gone, that child cannot be helped, this issue cannot be solved, that kind of thinking. And then the orchid, and there should be a little image of an orchid here, it didn't show up. But the orchid in our swamp, which is something that we need to rely on, is that context matters. And so the more that we can show images of the context, so for the example here is that employment demands shape parental behaviors. So that that tells you that the business community does play a role in the growth and development of our children and our communities. But even more, context matters, that children and families exist in communities. And when we constantly show pictures of children and families only in their home, it's not to say that those pictures are not bad all the time, but the more we can think about adding images, like I think about the same context of a diet where you add more of the good stuff in versus try to eliminate all the bad stuff, the more we can try to think about using images where families and children are in the context of where they spend time every day, at parks, in their communities, at the library, and these kinds of spaces, the better off we're going to be. So let me play that out a little bit here. So the second this image popped up on your screen, your brain processed it in milliseconds. Everybody's did, including the emotions that it triggers in your mind, this child situation, and the biases connected to it that we all have. So now let's say that you're an advocate working on issues connected to early childhood mental health, and you're creating a presentation for local residents and policymakers in your community to get them more connected to your work. Now, just think about whether or not this image might be the best one to use considering our swamp. And I want people to chime in here. So which of the alligators in our swamp might be eating the message that we're trying to convey through using an image like that? People can unmute and chime in, or people can just use the chat box. You see, there's been lots of conversation happening, which is great. So which of the alligators in our swamp, which multiple alligators are likely going to eat the message here that we use using this image? I know there are people on who have been through frames trainings before and should be able to identify the swamp, the alligators. Nobody's going to try even and throw one out? I'm going to do a long, awkward pause to just make people feel uncomfortable enough to type something in. And I'll ask the question one more time. If we were mental health advocates using this image as we were developing a presentation for policymakers, business leaders, and residents in our communities, why might this picture not be the best one to choose given our swamp? So Andrew chimed in the importance of the context matters, that this picture does not provide enough context for why that children might be experiencing poor mental health. And if you think about all of the biases that people come with, especially given that this child is alone in their home, it does not convey diversity. That is one issue too. This image has a lot of issues connected, especially to the family bubble, for one, that the fact that this child is in their home, people will automatically assume that parents did something to cause this child to be sad like this, that abuse or neglect might be involved, and that might not necessarily be the case. That kids sometimes, we have tough times, we need to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and move on, and this kid needs to, we've all been through it, and we all got out on the other side, which is, again, not the case. And then Heather chimed in too that it's depressing and not hopeful, and so that just promotes this damage done is damage done kind of mindset that people kind of subconsciously even check out and say, yeah, some kids just experience these things, and they just can't be fixed. Pardon me. So images that might be more useful in this context. So again, if you were giving a presentation in your community, especially to early childhood educators, business leaders, community members on the importance of early childhood mental health, using more images like these where it shows children in the context of relationships and environments, this shows them that relationships and environments matter. Furthermore, they show that children and families exist outside of the confines of a home. And this may seem trivial, but again, the subconscious reactions that we each have when we see images like these, and especially for those who might not be in the choir, just consider those reactions that are even at a subconscious level of constantly seeing images of children inside homes just reinforces that family bubble and some of those other swamp alligators kind of over and over. So the more that we can show children in the context of a play group with playing with each other and with adults, that the serve and return kind of aspects of connection between children and adults, even when a child is having a tough time. And then further, like to take it even a step further, to show early childhood professionals who are typically not pictured as early childhood professional, namely males, people of color, males of color especially. This just pushes people to think differently about who can play a role in a child's life, and the importance of that piece. So, and even taking it one step further, showing people again outside, even the context of taking people outside of any kind of building can also add this context of like, oh yeah, these people exist outside of their homes, that the community plays a role. People outside of that child's immediate family even play a powerful role in a child's life. And so even, you know, the librarian and the fact that she's interacting with this child, and intergenerational connections, as may they be that child's grandmother. And so you'll see as we show the photo bank in just a moment, that we're trying to use images that not only help us get out of the swamp, but that help people think differently about the roles that people play, the types of adults who play a role in a child's life, and who those adults look like, and even who those children look like. So I'll kind of pause there before I dive into the photo bank and the guide for visuals to tell you more about kind of how we've gotten this. So Becky chimes in, I wonder if others could weigh in on the reality versus desired attention span of information consumers these days. I'm laughing because it's a realistic concern. For example, the reality is that a 10-second video is more likely to be seen by a wide audience. But what about the value of a longer, more informational, educational video that might reach a smaller audience but deeply inform them? And I wonder if Maureen might want to chime in on this one, if you might have thoughts.
Yeah, no, Becky, that's exactly it. That I think that society has driven this almost expectation or norm with the, you know, uptick of viral reach, that the ultimate goal is wide dissemination, to see how many likes and how many people can reach. But just because somebody watched a 10-second piece of a video that you put out doesn't mean that they're moved to call to action. It doesn't even necessarily mean that they remember who your brand is or who you are or what you do. And so I definitely think that that's such a great point to bring out, that it comes back to this idea of setting a goal for anything, a communications focused goal for any activity that you're leading. So really, if you're looking at reaching an informed or reaching an audience to have them be more informed, and they're, you know, an engaged audience or a segment that you've narrowed down is going to be interested in that content, that I definitely think that sending maybe a longer video is a place where that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so how do you recommend balancing those two? Is it that we now need to do both the quick hook plus the deeper engagement? I would say no, that it's not a matter of doing both. It's a matter of thinking about what audience you want to move, and if one of those is better than the other, to move the needle for that audience. And so let me try to think of a good example. So I think that if your overall goal is general awareness of your brand, specifically say reaching new audiences in a metro urban area that you're working in, that a quick hook, 10-second to 30, or even a 30-second video that you know that that your audience is going to watch 10 seconds of, so you kind of front load content, is a great way to achieve general awareness. You're getting it in front of the most people possible, maybe using Facebook advertising or thinking about Facebook as the platform to achieve that goal. If the goal is to educate a group of train the trainers on a new technique or content that they need to be aware of, then I think that looking at something like a longer video, educational video, is probably a better fit to achieve that goal.
Yep. So I'll dive in interest of time. I'll dive into the photo bank, and we'll hopefully have some time to have more discussions, because I think these questions are really great and the discussion is great. And I think Julia's question around recently struggling with selecting photos that represent economic diversity. Has anyone else struggled with this? Most of the images I find represent middle to upper class, which I worry aren't representative of all of our audiences. And this is, I think it's a good question, and it's hard to grapple with, and especially because, you know, economic diversity isn't necessarily one of those things that is, you can see in a picture for sure. So I'll point out as we go through the photo bank and the guide for visuals, I'll point out a couple things to at least keep in mind as you choose photos like that. I think that's a good question to ask. So the photo bank, I just popped the link into the chat box. So the photo bank was developed by the Shared Messaging Action Team, and it was really because a lot of us want to think differently about the photos that we're using, stock photos that we're using, but most of us don't have any sort of budget to buy stock photos. And we also just, the time that it takes to search and try to find the perfect photo can take a lot of time. So what we did was kind of look at the free use sites and try to catalog some photos that we felt fell into the research-based frames and our kind of guardrails. And so as you can see, there's just a little bit of background. I'll go into the guide in just a moment. Folks are welcome to contribute to the photo bank. We've even had a school in Denver that got Dalton Gang Preschool, who got permission from all their parents to share a couple of photos, and real photos can be more powerful than stock photos in a lot of cases. So those are super helpful. And I know the Shared Messaging Action Team has a dream of hosting a giant photo shoot where there's, we create our own stock photos as well. So as you can see, there's kind of tags. So you can even click on different tags, and the bigger the tag, the more images we have connected to that tag. So you can see that we desperately are in need of maternal health ones that are, again, in frame. So preferably not of a mother alone in her home, that kind of thing. LGBTQ families, we definitely need pictures of those, of families with special needs, children with special needs. Children in the context of community spaces like libraries and grocery stores, where they spend a lot of time with caregivers. Those are ones that we are definitely in need of. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through a little bit and show you some of the images that we have. And it's as simple as clicking on an image, and you can right-click, save the image, and that it's as easy as that. If that's the way you want to go about this. So these are free and easy to use. And I remember one of the questions early on was around, oh my gosh, what if we all end up having the same pictures in our reports? And the response was, who cares if we all have much better images that are much more in frame and reflective of the diversity of our communities? And so I tend to be a little bit leaning that way, although I think we could definitely use more images to add to the photo bank, to just add to the wealth of images that we have access to. So again, anytime you can show families and communities in the context and where they spend every day, interactions with adults and other children. So one of the kind of criteria we had for the photo bank was no children alone. And we would pretty highly lean on the side of not putting pictures of children alone, especially not those stock photos of children with white space behind them. Again, it points so heavily to that family bubble, bootstraps, willpower framing that we chose for the photo bank to always have images in the context of other caregivers, or at least groups of children. So even if they're not within adult groups of children, showing images again of those who provide services to families in different kinds of, away from the default. So women, people of color, even families of different kinds, and that kind of thing. Let's see. And the prosperity value that's core to the message bank of just that community connectedness. So those are images that are hard to find too, but like hands in community, those types of images are going to be really helpful to use. Trying to go to the next page and just show. You can see these are the ones from the preschool in Denver that generously donated these images, which is really cool. So we have, yeah, a couple of children who are in groups, those kinds of things. So again, one of our biggest criteria was really children in the context of communities with other people, groups of children, caregivers. With our guide for visuals, which you can click on and download and print, it's nice to, kind of a nice thing to just have printed and at your desk. But these are just the kind of general tips to think about as you're trying to identify stock photos for reports and that kind of thing. So making sure to leaving out of images of babies alone, relying on that serve and return metaphor, wherever possible, leaning away from images of children and caregivers in a home and toward families in community spaces. And we've had good conversations around, you know, there's a potential for the family bubble to pop up essentially anytime you show an image, even like this one that has a great serve and return connection. And that's something that we're just grappling with. By no means do we want to move away from showing images of children with their caregivers. And so can we also just make sure that we're mixing it up, especially if we're communicating to an audience, which is much more likely to make that argument that it's the family's job to raise a child and I don't play a role, mixing it with images like this one where they're out in community, connecting with others, those kinds of things. And then a thing I wanted to point out of just being mindful that images of children of color are heavily overused when connected to issues around vulnerable populations, risk, that kind of thing. And just to really keep in mind that again, inadvertently reinforces the connection of certain populations to vulnerable, which is not something we want to reinforce. We can be realistic about things like data, but just keep in mind the systemic, like try to widen the lens as much as possible on the images that we're using, and think about systems versus individuals. And so the more that we overly use images around, especially including people of color, around vulnerable populations, we're just triggering that bias among our audiences. So just being mindful of that. And being solutions-oriented, asset-based, that kind of thing. So I want to make sure we move on to our Canva demonstration here, but want to make sure that if people do want to ask any questions about the photo bank, that you have the opportunity to do so. Some good, deep questioning about A/B testing and MailChimp in the chat box. I'm enjoying seeing this. And if there's any questions I missed while I was presenting that's connected to this photo bank. Heather Huffman said, when you say you're in need of certain pictures, how do you get them? Are you asking people to share images they find? Do you have resources to buy images from professional photographers? So this is a little bit of a complex question because a lot of times when you buy an image on something like Shutterstock, that image is only good, or the purchase is good for one license, meaning one user. So like the Civic Canopy could purchase a picture, but it doesn't mean we could post it to the photo bank. Almost all the pictures on the photo bank, aside from the few that were donated by that school, are ones that are already free use. We just kind of catalog them, if you will. It's much more if you have done a photo shoot in your community and are able to make those photos where people sign waivers, and you're able to make those photos available, that kind of thing. So yes, it's the images purchased from Shutterstock most often cannot be used unless you spend a lot of money in a free use space like this. So that's just something we're up against, but yeah. That's probably what we're looking for, like this generous donation of these images from a school where you can see multi-generational people in the context of community, kids active, playing outside. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. So are these photos suitable for large printing, such as a poster? Some of them are. I would not say that like the ones that were donated, these are most likely taken on a digital camera or a phone, are probably not. But some of the other ones that you can tell are higher quality should be able to be used in a larger format. You might have to play around with that a little bit. That's a good question. All right, so we're going to move over to Canva, and this will be the more highly interactive version of this. So when you log into, so Canva is something you can easily make. You go to canva.com, create a profile. That's the word I was looking for. And I want to go, before we jump really in, just a little bit of the basics on Canva and similar design tools. So the benefits of something like Canva, which is just an online tool for designing simple graphics like infographics, social media content. Benefits, it can be free or very low cost. So I can talk about the differences between the free version of Canva and it's $120 a year, which is not terrible for an organization to use. And we have one account at the Canopy that everybody here uses, or everybody that uses Canva uses. And so for us, it's been worth it across projects. We use it daily. The free version you can do quite a bit with. You cannot, for those who have specific branding guidelines like colors that you're using, you can't upload your own colors with the free version. There's a lot less photos that you have access to, graphics that you have access to, that kind of thing, but it's still doable, it's usable. So I don't want to say don't use the free version, because it actually can be really useful, especially if you are right now or just kind of messing around and trying things out. It's pretty simple and intuitive. They have templates that you can use that are pre-built, and you just kind of change the content. The sizing is one thing I love about Canva, where they have templates that are already pre-sized for social media, for infographics, for posters, for presentations, for logos, things like that, so you get the right size every time. Or even the social media graphics, you can get a specific Instagram template, a specific Facebook template. And then you can also copy, if you make it, say you're making a social media graphic and you want it to be used for both Facebook and Twitter. They have a basic one that you can use in all platforms, and it might not be perfect, but you can basically make a copy of a graphic that you made in the Facebook template, for example, and it'll automatically create a Twitter version, a Twitter-sized version of that. You might have to shift a couple things around, but it makes it really easy to use. And then some things to keep in mind, Canva is not as sophisticated as the more complex programs like InDesign, Adobe, things like that are more expensive and much more complex and require a lot more skill and design expertise to use. So it's not as sophisticated as those, and there are times when you're just going to need an expert to get in and use a more complex program. I think you have to be willing to test and try and get messy in Canva and mess things up, because it does, especially for those of us who are not maybe so design inclined, it just takes some practice. And then you'll still need to keep that checklist in mind, the audience, actions, the framing, everything we just presented. Cool, so I'm gonna it seems like Marina is managing the questions great, so I'm gonna go over to Canva and start kind of giving you a demo. Ooh, I don't know why Outlook is open. Okay, so you can see this is, when you get into Canva, this is what it looks like. So on the left side is kind of your folders, your menu, if you will. So I'm logged in as Hannah Nichols, but everybody at the Canopy uses this Canva account. So we have some folders based on some of our projects, as you can see. So for the ECCP, all of the graphics that we've created, we can just put them in that folder. So you can see we create everything from social media graphics to even just getting a nice sized icon, something like that. Presentations, so those kinds of things. All the infographics that we've used for our 2018 highlights, pretty much every email header that we use in MailChimp, we create in Canva. Simple images that we use, graphics, images that we use for presentations, for events, that kind of thing. An invitation when we did a 0-week screening. I'll click on things. These are, and this for me took 20 minutes, not even, to put together. For you, it might start as a heavier lift, but over time, hopefully you can create something like this in 10 minutes. So I'll go through a couple other, so you can see the canopy. We also use it generally across our projects. Again, we use this pretty much every day. So you can see the types of images that we're creating in Canva. Oh, and Cammie just chimed in and said, you can apply for a free single-user nonprofit version of Canva that has the premium benefits. And she inserted a link. That's awesome. Thank you. And Andrew said he does a lot in InDesign, in Illustrator. He's a seasoned communications professional, but finds Spark or Canva to be an awesome for quick turnaround in social content. Cool. And then the other one, I can't remember the name of them. There's a couple that are similar to Canva. Canva, for me, has been easiest to use, that kind of thing. So I'll show you a little bit. I'm gonna go into an existing one. So even when you go to design anything, it automatically pops up like I can just create a Facebook post. And you can see that it's 940 pixels by 788 pixels. So it automatically sizes it for you. There's poster option, Facebook cover, logo. So I can go type in social media. Not only do the things that I've already created pop up, the templates for a social media graphic pop up there. So, and you can also create custom dimensions if you need something that's a specific size. So I have actually done a little bit of resizing pictures and images that needed to be bigger or smaller here. It can get a little messy, but it works pretty well. And then there's also, you can create designs here. There's ways to create even just photo collages, that kind of thing. This is just essentially the long list of all of our different things that we have at the canopy. You can see sometimes it's just putting a small image on the page and then downloading it. It can run the gamut of the things that you can do. So I'm going to open an existing. Let me edit it. And so this is kind of the interface when you're creating and editing a current graphic. So this is one that has already been existed. So I'm basically just editing one that I already created for this webinar. And so you can see there are various kind of text boxes, kind of basic and easy to use. And in the background, there's an image that I've moved around. You can they have these tools where you can change the transparency of an image. So it started like that, and knowing that I wanted to make that text pop out on the screen, I just decreased the transparency of that image a little bit and messed around with it. I could probably even use a little bit more. And then you have these, on the left side here, you can see there's uploads where you can upload existing images, logos, that kind of thing that you have already created here. So you can even see, I'm going to delete that. I can click on it and it pops in the Early Childhood Partnership logo. This is not a great high-res version of our logo, but you can see how you can pop things in. And then you can pop in, there are things like elements. So if you wanted to, instead of this image, have just kind of a box behind it, you can scroll down and see shapes here. There are charts, lines, frames. These would be where you upload a picture and insert them in. And then there get things like icons and graphics. There are also a lot of stock photos on Canva too. What I usually do is do something like this. Square. I know I want a square, so I'm going to pop that in, like make it bigger, and then push it backwards so that it's behind the design. So you can see how you can use different kinds of tools and kind of layer your graphic, if you will. And then not only that, especially if you have the paid version, you can see that we already have the Canopy's brand colors, the ECCP's brand colors, along with a couple of other projects we support. So if I want it to be green, the ECCP green, I can click on that. And that's again only for the paid version, but you can add palettes, you can do, and you can upload any of your colors and your brand there. Same with fonts. So you can use this as the Canopy's basic fonts, but the Canva has a pretty decent list of lots of fun fonts. And we could always go into how to choose the right kind of font, but we won't go into that today. This is kind of the basic high-level version. But yeah, and so what I'm going to do is you can change things like the background, mess with things like that. I'm going to kind of start us over from square one for a moment so I can show you how to create something from the very basics. So if I'm creating a Facebook post, for example, brand new, it'll automatically, it's a blank slate, blank template, but it is already sized to what Facebook needs. And I can use this as ECCP Facebook post around Lunch and Learn, so that it's labeled. See, there are lots of chats happening, but I'm gonna assume. Thank you, Maureen, for moderating. I appreciate it. You can also use, what you see here on the left side are templates. And so for some, templates are wonderful because you can just go in and change the content. I am the type of person, for some reason, templates feel too complicated to me. I just want to create it on my own. But I would suggest getting started with a template. And so this is where you can they already have these kind of graphics plopped in, and you can just kind of change today is the 12th, so 3, 12, 19, and then you have to resize it, obviously, and mess with it. And you can change the color, things like that. But you can see how you can, and if I don't want that one, then I can delete it. Canva's a little funky with clicking lately and clicking on and off of things. I can create that or delete that whole box, but sometimes it doesn't let me do it. There you go. And so these even I can change to the ECCP's colors, that kind of thing. So that is the very basics of Canva and how you just start creating an actual graphic. But I want to pause for questions, knowing we just have a couple minutes left. There's a lot of conversation happening in the chat box, which is wonderful. Is there anyone, oh, I like that. How important is it to use your brand color, your colors and fonts? Maureen, do you want to chime in on that?
Well, I know that we have kind of a diversity in an audience today, so I think that is one dependent on if you have steadfast brand colors and fonts. The fonts in Canva may be a little bit different than your brand standard fonts. They're not traditional, so it may, one, be helpful to find one that looks similar, or two, stick with one kind of primary font and then build in some secondary fonts. So it's almost like you have a sub-brand for any of your Canva designing. I think it's important to really always use your brand standards and your colors when you can, just to keep that repetitive touch point building happening with your audience. But that being said, if it's something where you don't necessarily have colors in place, that really thinking about how the colors you're using reflect, once again, fit into that whole framework of who's your audience, what's your message, what's timing, how that all plays in together. But I definitely think it's it's important. Just to clarify, in case you were wondering, Polly, that if you can still build in all of your brand colors, even if you don't have a premium account with something like Canva. It just automatically sets it up for you if you do.
Oh, I didn't, okay, sorry. That was me miscommunicating about that issue. I thought it was actually that you could only upload your brand color. Sorry, I just had to run and grab my power cords. I'm out of breath now, but I thought that was only premium version. So that was my miscommunication.
Well, it doesn't, with the free version, it's not going to save them for you. You're just going to have to type them in every time.
Yeah, you just kind of type the RBG codes or whatever in every time, which can be done on a low budget. So I was just kind of toggling through things that can be done via Canva, graphics that are super simple but can be used really powerfully. In fact, I think, if I remember correctly, creating this one, I knew I wanted an image of a child not alone. And so when it came to, I'll zoom in a little bit here. When it came to, oops, and I just moved things around. When it came to this one, I pieced together two different images so that it was a child with a grandmother versus a child alone. So you can do a lot with it in terms of making your own graphics even as well. Would you use Canva or PictoChart for infographics? That's a great question. I'll let others chime in. I haven't used PictoChart a lot. I've used Canva, but I know that there are definitely some limitations on Canva creating infographics in terms of especially showing specific measurements, percentages, that kind of thing. You're going to do a lot of building things on your own, and from my understanding, PictoChart is a little more dynamic, but do others want to chime in? I know Cami has used it. Anybody else who has used PictoChart for infographics who wants to chime in on kind of costs and benefits of each? Okay, yeah, I'm guessing I think PictoChart is just much more dynamic of being able to build more complex infographics, but I
would jump into that just as we're talking through and with the concept of really thinking through interactive visuals, that, you know, in the infographic style, that you can adopt that really easily too. That Hannah is showing you a very built out kind of infographic style of visual, but you could also, you know, think about infographics as representing data in a visual way. So, you know, the little green map mark that says, you know, 31% in a county could be a graphic by itself, or you could, you know, add that into another dense Word document format that you have. That this idea of infographic can be really daunting or overwhelming sometimes when you think about all the tiny design pieces, or like within the scale of an infographic report. But really starting to adopt some of these visual representations of text is an excellent kind of idea and an easy way to start to work that in. And Andrew just commented that outsourcing infographics to people who are better is really also a thing to think about. You know, at Reach Out in Colorado, we have a creative agency, so I by far can't, that we have on a retainer, so I really can't take credit for all the excellent infographic work that we're producing out of here. That they have a design team of actual, you know, people who study graphic design, and that is their trait and career. So that is an excellent point, Andrew. But I think I really think that thinking of it small scale is an easy way to start. You know, if you're writing 35% somewhere, is there a way that you can represent that graphically to be, one, easier to digest for your audience, two, more memorable, and three, more interactive? It just has a more dynamic kind of visual reception.
Thank you, that's super helpful. Yeah, and Cami said that PictoChart allows you to input data, and then it allows you to choose how to display it graphically. So that is one thing that's a little bit of a limitation of Canva and infographics. But this, I mean, probably not the most fancy infographic ever, and I'm fairly new at graphic design kind of stuff, so, but fairly decent for what you can do with Canva. So I think it does take a little creative brain and being willing to just get messy. Like this took a lot of me just thinking things through and drawing pictures on a piece of paper first and thinking about a plan beforehand and what data was going to be valuable for the ECCP audience, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think things to think about. So
hey Hannah, keep that slide. Can you pull that back up for a second?
Yeah.
Also, just as for anybody who is a newer audience on here, when you see it says annual survey by numbers and under it says email header, 600 pixels by 200, that's actually the size that's the size that the graphic is coming out. So if you're doing something like a Facebook header, an email header in MailChimp or Constant Contact, you can just internet search or search within that specific platform what the expected measurement is, and then this might be an email header, but say for example, Constant Contact actually requires, you know, a header that is 800 by 300, that you can either make a custom graphic in Canva that fits that exact size, or you can find a template that is actually that size. So that's another way too. I know if anybody's ever uploaded a header to say Twitter and it came across as very kind of blurry or stretched, that it just means that it's the wrong size for that content piece.
Yeah, that is such a good point. And I think the reality is Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, they don't work very well together. And LinkedIn, you know, like we use multiple platforms at the Canopy in terms of sizing. And the reality is, so I'm not a full-time communications person, at least not connected to content. And so I just don't necessarily always have the time to kind of copy the versions of Facebook, Twitter content. And so what I'll do is just create the general social media graphic that might get cut off a little bit on the top or bottom, and I just have to deal with that. But it just saves time for those of us who are time limited, that kind of thing. But all in all, it does make it, Canva makes it pretty easy to then copy an image and resize it. So you can kind of see. I go in, and then we'll start letting people go. But anybody who has last minute questions, please start chiming in and let me know. So you can either resize to, if I want this to be a Facebook post specifically, I can copy and resize it. And it might look a slightly funky, but you can kind of adjust things as needed based on how. So yeah, there's a little bit extra on the sides that I might move this over, that kind of thing. So you can see how it works. I think like this image is just a stock photo that was part of Canva. These are graphics that were part of Canva. It was a little Valentine's Day thing that we did for the Canopy. We've already uploaded our logo, or a little, we call it our jack, that can be, we can adjust the coloring on things. So yeah. With that, we want to let people get out on time today, and so I want to make sure that you have access to our email addresses. So Marina and I are both willing to be thought partners, and if you feel like you want a little more TA on Canva, email, especially like transferring your email outreach and marketing into something like MailChimp or Constant Contact, reach out, and I'm 100% happy to chat with somebody on the phone or provide a little more one-on-one TA. But yes, Maureen says the same thing. And with that, we will follow up to everybody registered with the recording and the slides, and hopefully I can even maybe attach, what do you call it, a record of the chat box so that people can see all the great things that came up in the conversation. So I'll reach out to you all within 24 hours, and I hope everybody, wherever you are in Colorado, is safe from this impending blizzard that we're apparently getting. So, so stay safe and warm in the rest of the week, and we'll be reaching out in the next couple days. Talk to you later. And thanks again to Maureen. Oh my gosh, thank you for Maureen for jumping in and being willing to share so much of your knowledge with the group. So appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. I love having these kinds of conversations. And to everybody who was talking in the group chat, you're awesome. Thank you. To anybody who was listening and maybe didn't engage with the group chat because that's not your style, you're awesome too. So I think it was really a good energy on this phone call today. So, you know, we just scratched the surface on a lot of this stuff. So really, honestly, feel free to reach out if you want to talk more or, you know, you need a sounding board. Yeah, so happy Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks everybody.